Everyone, welcome to the Monomoy Regional School Committee meeting for Thursday, November 19th, and it is 6:30. We're calling the meeting to order here at 6:32, and we will do a roll call order. We'll start in the Zoom room, so Joe and Sharon, if you could state your name and present. Joe, we'll start with you.
Joseph Osceola, present.
Thank you. Sharon?
Sharon Scout, present.
Thank you. Jackie?
Jackie Long, present.
Thank you. Meredith?
Meredith Henderson, present.
Nancy?
Nancy Scott, present.
Terry?
Terry Russell, present.
Joanne?
Joanne Sheehan, present.
And Tina Games, present. And the first order of business is approval of minutes from November 5th. Could I have a motion to approve, please?
So moved.
I have
Oh, hold on one second, Sharon. So Jackie has made the motion. May I have a second?
Second.
And Nancy has seconded. And any discussion?
yes.
Sharon, go ahead.
I'd like, there was, just before the vote on the second public comment period, it didn't reflect that Terry and I spoke on the importance of the community input. So I'd like that one sentence to be added there.
Okay, so that is under the discussion for the policy. Is that the second public comment? Okay.
No, second public, yeah. That's
Okay.
it.
And so Leah, if you could make that note that we'll add a line in under the description for second public comment. We'll just add in that there was, Sharon, can you just say what you want for us to put?
Terry Russell and Sharon Scout spoke about the importance of comments from the public.
Okay.
Comments from the public or community input, I'm sorry.
That would be fine, either one.
Okay, thank you.
All right, wonderful. Anything else? Okay, so we will put that in there. Do I need to revise the motion, or can we just vote with that one addition, edit? Do we need to revise the motion? I'm not sure. I don't think we do. So we'll just vote for the one? Okay. All right, so we're going to vote in favor. We'll make that one extra line that Sharon has requested. So we're going to approve the minutes with the addition of that one line under second public comment. So Joe, we'll start with you.
Approval of the minutes, Joe Osceola, aye.
Thank you. Sharon?
Aye.
Thank you. Jackie?
Aye.
Meredith?
Aye.
Nancy?
Aye.
Terry?
Aye.
Joanne?
Aye.
And I'm an aye. So that is unanimous. Thank you all. And now we're going to move to our student representative who is in the Zoom room this evening. Amy Hinesley, welcome. And you can go ahead and turn your mic on.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for having me once again. I look forward to updating you on all the things that have been going on around Monomoy for the past month. This morning, the Guidance Department held their 7th annual Fall Breakfast of Excellence to honor AP Scholars and John and Abigail Adams Award winners among juniors and seniors. Recently, junior book awards were given to those who are now seniors to honor achievement in the various departments and for select colleges. Our October Scholar Athletes of the Month were Amy Hinesley of field hockey and Miles Boyle of boys soccer. On November 16th, grades closed to end our first quarter, closing it off, and we are happy to have made it so far into the school year extremely smoothly, thanks to the help of our outstanding staff and students. During the last week of October, Spirit Club hosted the annual Fall Spirit Week with theme days such as Pajama Day, Color Wars, and costumes on the day before Halloween. After the votes were tallied up, the freshman class won both Spirit Bus Video and Theme Day competition. In fundraising news, the class of 2024 held a drive-thru trick-or-treating event on Halloween, and the class of 2022 is currently selling wreaths for the holiday season upcoming. And for some club news, which there's a lot of, a club fair document was sent out to all students with flyers and videos to encourage them to join clubs in the absence of our usual club fair in the gym. The Sanskrit Writing Club visited elementary schools on Halloween to read stories to the students, celebrating their yearly tradition once more. Interact Club had another busy weekend partnering with Faith Family Kitchen at the drive-through food delivery at Cape Cod Community College. Right now they're running a clothing drive to help the family pantry of Cape Cod. If you see boxes around, we appreciate any donations, especially with the difficult winter months coming up. Similarly, beginning tomorrow, the Student Council will be starting their annual Stuco Cares, where students collect donations from the classrooms from students and teachers monthly in exchange for a treat. This week, the donations will be benefiting the Harwich Family Pantry. Mr. Southall is forming a young men's club to benefit the boys in our district through this challenging time. And for our new segment, in Monomoy WMRS, senior digital media students Maggie Dever and Colby Jones have been holding Principal's Corner. They interview Miss Police on various aspects of current events in our district. And then these can be watched in the Friday Focus or on the Monomoy WRMS YouTube. There have been a lot of alumni sightings recently also, with so many students who are home and they've been subbing around the district, which is always nice to see from their faces. Now for some athletic news. Girls soccer faced a hard-fought game against Sturgis West for the second round of tournament where the girls fell 1-0 in the last minutes of the game. Boys soccer
Are you with us, Amy, or did we lose your mic? Are you frozen? Is she frozen?
Sturgis East.
Oh, there you go.
Cross country.
Okay. Go ahead, Amy. Sorry, we lost you for just a second. See, if you could roll back to boys soccer.
Yeah. Boys soccer being the second seed in the Lighthouse tournament, clinched a close 2-1 win versus Sturgis East to win the Lighthouse district. Field hockey finished the season out with a season and tournament out with a winning streak against Falmouth and SJP and won the Cape and Islands League once again with an 11-1 lead over Sturgis East. Cross country, after an almost undefeated season, fell to Sturgis on the 3rd. At the league meet, the boys finished 6th overall and the girls finished 2nd overall. The team had 6 league all-stars this year. I hope everyone has a wonderful Thanksgiving break, and thank you so much for having me once again.
Thank you, Amy, and congratulations for being a scholar athlete.
Thank you.
Anybody, any questions for Amy? Questions, comments? All right, Amy, thank you once again for a great report. We'll see you, I guess, in 2021. Is that your next visit, or I think
December.
Are you coming
and then
December
20.
10th? Okay, good. So we'll see you then.
Wow, that's scary.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
All right,
Thank you.
bye-bye. All right, now we'll move into public comment. Speakers are limited to 3 minutes, additional time at the discretion of the chairperson. Do we have anyone from the public who would like to speak this evening? All right, seeing none, we will move on to recognitions. Dr. Carpenter?
I have none this week.
Oh, wow, okay. So we'll move into reports and discussions. And our first item is the DESE response to regional agreement changes. Dr. Carpenter?
So in your packets, we have a heavily marked up regional agreement that you have that you've seen before, that has green and blue and yellow colors on it. This was the one that we brought to the selectmen and incorporated feedback from our community there. We then took that document and we needed to send it to DESE for for feedback from the Department of Ed. There was only really one substantive thing that the Department of Ed suggested that we needed to change in the regional agreement, and that shows up in both documents now. It's sort of I guess easiest to see in the first one that just has the red line, the red line changes. But the Department of Education had concerns about I guess you could call it the constitutionality of a requirement of having one member from each town voting in the affirmative for something to pass when there's a majority vote. They felt that It's okay for most of the business that the school committee conducts, but there are certain things under statute, and it's a fairly limited number of things, one of them being an annual budget, that they felt we would not be able to have that clause apply. So they suggested a short little passage before that that says, unless otherwise required by law or regulation. And the district's lawyer, excuse me, will be coming up with a list of, sort of an exhaustive list of all of the things in the statute where that would apply. I have had Leah go through the last 5 years, and she has this long list of all of the votes that you've taken in the last 5 years, and she'll kind of highlight which ones of those would actually apply. But to the best of my knowledge, with the exception of budget, I think the feedback that Desi's giving us is that the weighted voting clause as it stood would hold, but obviously those small number of things where there's a specific statute related to it saying majority vote in the statute would have to be pure majority, not also require a affirmative from both from a member of both towns to pass.
All right, is that it? Any questions, anyone? And I think, let me just take a quick look. So I know that because this is one of our school committee goals, so is there, just for my own knowledge, and I guess for all of us really, so can somebody walk us through the time, so this, when this regional agreement goes, is it going to be cleaned up, I guess, to go to the towns? Nancy, I don't know, maybe you can answer that question?
I'm sorry, I don't do you mean what's going to happen to it from here?
Yeah.
So once we vote the change, then it has to be voted by each Board of Selectmen.
Okay.
And then it will go on their town warrants for town meeting for it to be approved
Okay.
there.
Okay, thank you for that.
That's,
Yeah.
I think one of the hitches that we had last year is that the redlined version didn't match up with the clean version, so we just want to make sure, because apparently most are going to look at just the redline version
Yep.
and not the final draft.
Right,
So-
exactly. And I know that's a school committee goal for us too, so we want to stay on top of that. Thank you. Any questions about the DESI response to the regional agreement? Sharon or Joe? Anyone in the room? We're good? Okay, so we will move on to the next item, which is elementary per pupil costs and enrollment challenges. Dr. Carpenter.
All right, I will have Jim help me out with just projecting a slide deck. So the committee, was sent essentially a 25-page document. Only about 8 of it was, or 7.5 was text. The rest were a whole series of appendices. And I wanted to provide the appendices just so we'd have all the information we might need to guide discussions now and in the future. So the following slide deck just walks through that report, essentially paragraph by paragraph, just sort of, projecting, the most important salient, bits of information. It's an important discussion to have. So it's dealing with what I would say are inequities that we have at our elementary schools with the per pupil budgets. If you take the total budget at Chatham Elementary School and the total budget at Harwich Elementary School and you divide each of those by the number of students, there's a discrepancy between those, the per pupil budgets or per pupil spending or costs, if you want to look at it that way, at the 2 elementary schools, and that difference continues to grow, particularly as Chatham Elementary shrinks. Also, and related to this, we have challenges with what's happening when both of our elementary schools are losing enrollment, one at a quicker rate than the other. So if we sort of go to the next slide, the challenge is something that, that is a challenge that's more than just a decade old. In fact, I would argue that one of the driving factors that brought Monomoy together is that Chatham public schools in the previous decade had been slowly losing enrollment and reaching a point where they needed to partner with another town to bolster and support having enough students so that down the road, when those kindergartners became seniors, there'd be enough students in a senior class. So this is something that's not new, but it's actually accelerating, and it's happening across the Cape. We have fewer and fewer young families with school-aged children. A lot of this is tied to conversations on affordable housing, cost of living, childcare options, the fact that the Cape is a retirement destination and becoming more so. And then in recent years, there's been this growing Airbnb type of industry, where houses that may have been affordable homes for young families, get snapped up and are being used for, short-term seasonal rentals. The challenge that we have here at Monomoy is this impact is happening far more in one town than the other. So it's happening in both towns, but happening at a much greater rate in Chatham compared to Harwich. So since regionalization, on the next slide, Jim, we have, there's a number of changes have happened. So Chatham Elementary had back in FY12. So FY12 was the last fiscal year that Chatham and Harwich operated fiscally separate. In FY12, Harwich Elementary had 579 students, 6 of them Chatham students. Chatham Elementary had 279 students, 53 of those came from Harwich. A decade later, in FY21, our current year, if we look at what the enrollment would have been had COVID not created our little interesting situation, but what the enrollment we were planning on having just prior to the opening of schools, Harwich Elementary was to have about 512 students in it, including 10 that were from Chatham. It's seen a 12% drop in enrollment over the last decade. Chatham Elementary, 170 students, excuse me, 24 from Harwich. It's seen a 39% drop in enrollment in the past decade. So this enrollment decline that's happening at both elementary schools, but particularly at Chatham Elementary School, is exacerbating 2 dilemmas. First, as the elementary schools enrollment's declining, we're seeing the per pupil expenses at that elementary school are starting to skyrocket. And the reason that per pupil expenses would skyrocket is you have fixed costs to operate a school. So in this high school, there's heat, electricity, there's a principal, there's a nurse, there's a librarian, there's the clerical staff in the front office, and so all those things are going to be in every school that you walk into. What tends to be variable in your school is how many teachers you have, and that's a function of how many students. So the fewer students you have, those fixed costs get spread between fewer and fewer students. So we see as Chatham Elementary's enrollment is plummeting, its per pupil costs are starting to escalate. The other dilemma that we have out there is that as Chatham Elementary School continues to get smaller and smaller and smaller, it does create situations on not, or potentially not having enough peers in the building to provide a really rich social environment for, in which kids can learn, but also a challenge for staff, that you have a situation where staff have no other grade level peer in which to collaborate with And those, those are, two very different dilemmas out there, but they're also completely connected together. So first, to talk about the per pupil budget differences. So on this slide, what we look at is we look at what the school budget was at Chatham Elementary School and Harwich Elementary School in FY12, FY25, the present year, and what we would project those budgets to be out in FY25. And to project out to FY25, we have a good idea what the enrollment's going to look like when those kindergartners become fourth graders. We know how those buildings are going to be contracting in terms of their enrollment. We know that we can reduce some of the staffing in both of those buildings. So those staffing costs are pulled out of those projections. And then the projections just have the remaining budget escalated by 2% per year to come up with that projection. So it's a fairly, I think it's a fairly tight projection for what we can expect out in FY25. So in FY12, the per pupil expenditures, or the per pupil budget at Chatham Elementary School was $9,430. At Harwich Elementary School, it was $8,489, and there was just under a $1,000 difference between Chatham Elementary and Harwich Elementary as the district was heading into regionalization. Today, we find that Chatham Elementary's per pupil expenditures are $16,879 per child. Harwich Elementary's per pupil budget is $11,885. So that difference has now grown to almost $5,000 per child. In FY25, as Chatham Elementary continues to contract at a much faster rate than Harwich Elementary, that's going to grow more. Chatham's elementary per pupil budget will reach, what we've been hearing about, like Provincetown, where there's a few number of students for the elementary schools. So Chatham Elementary's per pupil budget will exceed $26,000. We project it to be at $26,526. Harwich Elementary at $13,750, and that per pupil budget difference now would rise to $12,776. So to kind of get at the inequity, the inequity is not that we are spending more money at Chatham Elementary so that we have this better educational program happening at Chatham Elementary. We do everything we can at Monomoy at our elementary level to go and ensure that the educational program, the offerings, and the things that children are exposed to academically are the same or similar in both of those schools. And we want to make sure that we have an excellent education that's happening at both elementary schools. The inequity here is how the elementary per pupil budget difference impacts the Harwich taxpayers. And this is where you have to kind of stick with me for a little while and kind of open your minds to some math. So if we look at our regional agreement, our regional agreement takes the bulk of the operational costs and it splits those between the two towns. So it splits them based on the 3-year rolling average of foundation enrollment. Foundation enrollment is all the children that go to public schools in Harwich and Chatham. So remember I said FY12 was the year just prior to regionalization. So if we go to the first year of regionalization, FY13, Harwich paid 72% of those of that difference based on its 3-year rolling average of enrollment. 72% in FY13 has grown for Harwich to 74.35% in the present year. If we look out 4 more years out into FY25, it'll go from 74.35% to 79%, based on the enrollment that we're seeing out there in kindergarten and who's going to be graduating senior year at the high school here over the next 4 years. So we're going to see over the next 4 years that go from 74.35 to 79%. If we look out far into the distance, when those kindergartners walk across the stage and get their diplomas, I'm going to feel like I'm back at home, where in my former district it was an 87%, 13% split, and that's where we're heading, given the demographics that we see out there in kindergarten. So the challenge we have is that we have a regional agreement that says that the cost to run the district gets split, where Harwich at the moment is essentially carrying 3/4 of that burden of that split. And we know as we look forward, that burden gets heavier and heavier on the Harwich, on the Harwich side. So if we just sort of stick with the math on this, if we go back to FY12, that $941 difference per child, there were 265 kids at Chatham Elementary School. That per pupil difference would have added up to almost $250,000. But keep in mind, in FY12, we hadn't fully regionalized. So the town of Chatham paid that full difference. That was, all of those kids were still town of Chatham charges. The following year, when we regionalized, the per pupil difference went up just a little bit to $1,263 per pupil times 258 or 259 students at Chatham Elementary School, so that per pupil difference per kid, over the entire building was almost $350,000. And keeping in mind that back in FY13, Harwich was paying 72% of those costs. Today, we have the per pupil delta at the elementary schools, $4,994. There's only 170 pupils at Chatham Elementary, but that 170 times $4,994 is an $848,000 delta, of which Harwich ends up carrying a large portion, 74.35%. And if we look forward, that per pupil delta and multiplied by what we anticipate only at 100 elementary students at Chatham Elementary will be over $1 million, with Harwich being responsible for 79% of that. Now, I want to kind of emphasize, those numbers look big, they are, but Harwich isn't responsible for, you just can't take 79%, multiply it by that 1.2 million and say, oh, that's Harwich's impact. Because the way our assessment gets calculated, we have to back off Chapter 70 aid that would be coming into that school choice money, other revenues that the district has. So it ends up being less, but it's still a big number. And I'll just kind of get at what that looks like here. So if we want to talk about how can we provide some fiscal or how can we remedy this fiscal inequity? The challenge is, we assess our towns the way the regional agreement that we just talked about. We talked about a change in how what DESI's response was to a majority vote, but the regional agreement also has language in it on how we're supposed to assess the towns, and we follow that. So the voters voted back in 2010 on how we should go assess the towns, and we follow that. In order for us to do something different, we would have to have the regional agreement amended, which means that we would have to have the selectmen And both town meetings approve a different approach to assessing the schools. So, or assessing the towns for the operation of the schools. So the school committee has a 2020-2021 goal to establish a working group early in the budget process to discuss the regional agreement assessment at the elementary level. And in part, this front end of the conversation is to, we'll say, catalyze that. The group would involve selectmen from both towns and their appointees, and clearly it's going to involve, the school committee and your appointees to that conversation. So in terms of my recommendation on how you can go about creating better equity, I have played with all different ways to look at this, and I think the easiest, most simplistic, fairest way to deal with it is just to approach it and say, okay, Chatham, you pay for the budget at Chatham Elementary School. Harwich, you pay the budget for Harwich Elementary School. And that way, Harwich isn't subsidizing any of those additional costs that are happening at Chatham Elementary School. But you have to keep in mind that Chatham still pays for a quarter of Harwich's budget. So, so that's what Harwich would have to pick up. And that's why when you look at these numbers and you sit there and say, in FY25, didn't that number say $1.2 million and Harwich was at 79%? You have to keep in mind that there are those things that would get backed off, those Chapter 70, the school choice, other revenues, and the fact that Chatham pays for a sizable chunk of Harwich's budget. So if we were to do this in FY13, it would have meant, we can't go back and fix history, but it would have meant that as the district was coming together, had the towns chose to come up with some other way to assess the school district, if they had Harwich pay for Harwich Elementary School, Chatham pay for Chatham Elementary School from the get-go, it would have had Chatham's assessment in FY13 up just over $400,000, and Harwich is down the same. In FY21, present year, if this had been written in and agreed to in the regional agreement, it would have Chatham spending $572,000 more to run its schools and Harwich paying $572,000 less. And if we look off into FY25, 4 years, just 4 years off into the future, it would have Chatham's assessment going up $738,000, Harwich is going down $738,000. So again, anything like this would require changing the regional agreement to change the funding formula in that. It is also a little bit more challenging if you think of a scenario where we have more Harwich children that are getting shipped to Chatham Elementary by either some sort of redistricting, like having, where Joy lives in East Harwich and having East Harwich children that are bused to Chatham Elementary to balance things out, or if we were to form an upper and a lower school. But there are ways that you can mathematically go and come up with what the number would be to go make something fair and equitable. And along that lines, I want to address one misconception. I had conversations with a couple Chatham officials yesterday, and I think there's, I think on some level, and I know that anybody that I've talked to on the Chatham side would love to see more children at Chatham Elementary School. So if we take the notion of let's have children in East Harwich that live closer to Chatham Elementary School go to Chatham Elementary School. It will, if we move more kids into Chatham Elementary School, it will have Chatham Elementary School's per pupil spending come down. If we move children out of Harwich Elementary School, it will have Harwich Elementary School per pupil spending go up. but doing that has equalized it may equalize per pupil spending, but you've actually done it at the expense of the Harwich taxpayers. So there was no fiscal relief in that. You just put more children at Chatham Elementary School and filled empty classrooms at Harwich Elementary School by creating empty classrooms or you filled empty classrooms at Chatham Elementary School by creating empty classrooms at Harwich Elementary School. So if we think of other ways to reconfigure, we can't just have that be a conversation without having that first conversation with the selectmen and saying, okay, we do need to come up with a way to create more fiscal equity when it comes to elementary funding.
I'm not sure if this would be a good time to bring up, because it has been a conversation and a lot of questions in the past of, well, why don't we just get more school choice kids in Chatham? Can you
Yeah, and it's
touch on that?
it's a great question. So first of all, I think we are at the moment letting in every school choice child from Chatham. We have space, and in the past years we have been letting in the children from Chatham. But I think there's just a reality how many children from Chatham are applying. So in the past, if we go back to FY12 and FY13, the bulk of Chatham's school choice children came from the only community that wraps around it. That's Harwich. And since regionalization, I think many of the Harwich families have looked at it. It doesn't matter, we don't have to drive our children to Chatham because we're going to get the same education for our kids at Harwich Elementary as we do at Chatham Elementary. They're going to go to the same middle school and go to the same high school. So I think the desire of Harwich families to go to Chatham Elementary, I think, has declined with regionalization. And the bulk of Chatham's school choice pool came from Harwich to begin with, because Harwich wraps on all sides, with the exception of water, around Chatham. So we see a number of families from Dennis that will apply, saying we would like school choice to Harwich, or from Yarmouth to Harwich. And I think just the same way that some families in Chatham see Harwich as so far away, the families from Dennis that are applying for school choice, might see Chatham as so far away. And frequently, if we have classes that are filled at Harwich Elementary School, we will offer the family and say, well, we can't fit you in kindergarten at Harwich Elementary School, but we have a space at Chatham. And sometimes they take us up on it, and sometimes they realize that that's one town too far for their family logistics. I think where the misconception comes from is that we occasionally, let's say, have 2 open slots for a classroom at Chatham Elementary School, and we have 6 or 7 Harwich children apply, or families that have 6 or 7 children apply for that. So we accept the 2 Harwich children for those slots, and we have to say no to the other 5, or those class sizes would not be, or would go way over 18. And I think, so I think that, some people have heard, well, they turned away 5 Harwich families. Well, we did, because it was just 5. Had those 5, plus another 13 applied, we would have we'd accept all 18, have that class at Chatham Elementary, but we would also have a teacher from Harwich Elementary come over with them, because we just decreased Harwich Elementary by an entire class of children. So I think that's some of the misconception out there, is we have turned down some students from Harwich that have applied to Chatham Elementary just because we had filled the class. We do a little mini lottery if we have if we have more applicants than we have seats available. But more often than not, we are not turning children away. In fact, we were almost in an awkward predicament this year prior to COVID because we didn't have enough children that are Chatham resident children to merit, I would say, on some level, running a kindergarten classroom. And we needed every one of those Harwich children, plus every one of the kids, I think, are they from Brewster, Robin? Okay, so one from Brewster and one from Yarmouth. But we needed the Harwich kids plus the Yarmouth and Brewster child to have a cohort big enough to say, okay, we're at least running a fiscally responsible kindergarten. And we are worried, looking out 1 year off, whether there's going to be a big enough cohort, and if we don't have another half dozen plus families from Harwich and beyond, we could be in a situation where you're at a place that there's less than 10 kids, and what do you do? Because keep in mind that we are at the place where we're at one classroom of kindergartners. Do you have those 10 kids together for the next 5 years? And is that the best thing for them in terms of learning and social development? All right, on to the other side of this coin. Which is looking at the challenge of a small elementary school and a compromised ability to provide an ideal teaching and learning environment. So first of all, there is a lot of stuff in the literature on the positive impacts of small class sizes. A lot of it's been done in urban areas where they had class sizes in the upper and mid 20s, and they dropped those class sizes down to 15, 18 students. At Monomoy, ever since I've been here, we have budgeted for and staffed to have our class sizes 18 plus or minus 1. As a district, we pride ourselves in having small class sizes at the elementary level and small class sizes middle school and high school. Coming into regionalization, Chatham had very small class sizes. Even when my first year here, and I know that many of us at the table had kids that were in classrooms of 14 kids or 11 kids. And I remember going into Chatham High School into an AP psychology class, and they were having a classroom discussion with the 3 students in the class. I would argue that there were some of those classes that were too small, but there is not a body of literature. Nobody has gone out to research too small. They've researched too big. Nobody's gone out to research too small. But at some point, classes do become too small. That AP Psych discussion could have been much better if there were 18 students in the room than just 3 students in the room. And when you have small class, really small class sizes, you end up with some interpersonal dynamics where too often one individual ends up sort of dominating social situations. So again, too small, not exactly great. So then, so we have at times in Chatham and may, looking forward, be at a place where a classroom is too small, but then we have to ask, is it ever a situation where a school becomes too small? And we started this conversation over 3 years ago, and I was starting to hear from teachers and parents because Chatham Elementary was at a place where we were going from 3 classrooms per grade level to 2. And the worry was, is 2 classrooms per grade level too small? And here we are 3 years later, just 3 years later, and I'm now saying we're not looking at 2, folks. We're looking at 1 classroom per grade level, and we're struggling to fill the 1 classroom. So I appreciate that small schools provide a lot of intimacy. And in fact, having come from a big high school, I love that Monomoy Regional High School is small by comparison, and we can treat people like family. That's what we pride ourselves on as a district. But you hit a place where things in a school become so small that there are other concerns. And you can imagine, again, that kindergarten class. Let's say it's, at the moment, it's, Robin, what would be the class size in kindergarten at the moment if we didn't have COVID? Pre-COVID? 17? Okay, so imagine 17 children moving through school for the next 5 years all together. What if the child has some interpersonal differences with another? I know that one of my children had some drama that went on a long time, and that we'd be reaching out to the principal saying, please, let's not have son or daughter in a class with this other child. It would be best if they're in different classes next year. It's one class. You don't have that option. And then you have the case where, I was worried when we moved here. My son was in a class with 11 children, and there was only 2 other boys. And it was like, what if one of those 2 other boys he doesn't find a connection with? And luckily, thank God, he found a lifelong friend in one of those 2 boys, not the other. But that was chance. And it would be a miserable next 5 years if there wasn't that best friend to have that supportive relationship that I think you look forward to getting up every day and going into school for. So I do worry that one classroom in a school may be too small. The other thing I worry about is from a staff perspective, that it's as important to our teachers to have a peer or peers to turn to share best practices, share curriculum, develop as professionals together. And we're at a place, it's at Chatham Elementary School. It's like, okay, who's the first grade curriculum leader? Well, next year it'll be whoever the first grade teacher is. And it's, you're at this place that you're only sort of remotely getting professional development and having to kind of connect with Harwich when we can. But it's much more ideal if all that's happening under one roof, and that that you have those supportive peers. Okay, so I want to emphasize one thing. Over the next few slides, I'll be talking about possibilities for reconfiguration. I can't control reconfiguration. The school committee cannot control reconfiguration. I had somebody yesterday say, well, come on, Scott, you can just move more kids from Harwich over to Chatham Elementary. I said, I actually can't. It's like it would, if only it was that simple. So we have a regional agreement. The regional agreement reads, there shall be no less than 1 elementary school in each member town. Students in the elementary grades shall attend schools in their towns of residence. And then there's this other clause, except in special cases where defined by the regional district school committee. What that means is it permits us, if we have a intensive needs special education program happening at Harwich Elementary School, and there's a child at Chatham Elementary School who would benefit from that program, it allows us to go and send them to that program that would make most sense for them. It allows us to have intra-district school choice and have families from Harwich volunteering to go fill classrooms, seats that are available at Chatham Elementary. It does not permit me or the school committee or Miss Millen to go and say, you, East Harwich, you will come to Chatham Elementary because I said so. So, 3 years ago, almost to the day, I had this conversation It took 3 years to go and remove many of the arrows from my back. It was not an easy conversation. There were a lot of people that came and spoke at public comment, and I'm sure that our next meeting, we will probably have a lot of people coming to public comment. Warning, but we put out a survey. I put a blog post out there, I believe it was November 7th, 2017. I posted a blog post on our website, sent out an email to parents, and I invited families that were in elementary school, and we reached out to daycare or preschool providers and sent the survey out to future elementary families as well, and our staff at the elementary schools, and asked them to provide us feedback on 3 options. Option 1 is to not reconfigure, to maintain the status quo as outlined in the regional agreement. Option 2 would be to redistrict, which would end up sending some children that are close in Harwich communities or neighborhoods close to the Chatham line, send them to Chatham Elementary School instead of Harwich Elementary School, but that would require a change to the regional agreement. And then the third option that we put on there was to create an upper and a lower elementary school, potentially having Harwich Elementary be pre-K through grade 2, Chatham Elementary grade 3 through 4, or some configuration, vice versa, whatever. But that would require amending the regional agreement to do it. 453 respondents. I came and presented at the school committee meeting November 30th, 2017, and this was the results. This is not, this is a 3-year-old survey, but this is what people said. Our staff, over 2/3 of them wanted to see upper and lower schools. And it makes sense. If you remember, they want peers. They want to have their own support group. And upper and lower schools would have staff who teach at the same grade level, all under the same roof. Okay, the Chatham parents, their responses. Chatham parents felt very differently. The last thing they wanted was upper and lower. They were pretty much split between not changing or redistricting, with slightly more favoring the status quo. Harwich parents, on the other hand, complete opposite. The Harwich parents wanted upper and lower, and the last thing that they wanted was the status quo. So you can see where this is going. It's pretty much the stalemate. School choice parents went exactly like Harwich parents and our staff, wanting to see upper and lower. So given that we had a clear split, we tabled the discussion, removed the arrows from my back, and healed for 3 years, only to put myself out there as the sacrificial lamb in 2020. The challenge is, things have changed in 3 years. Enrollment has declined at Chatham Elementary School to the point that we need school choice applicants to fill just a kindergarten section. Enrollment at HES has also dropped. So we used to, when I first came here to the district, there were 6 sections of kindergarten, first grade, second grade. 6 sections are now becoming 5 sections, and in just a couple years, there will be 5 sections per grade, all grades at Harwich Elementary School. There does not to be any evidence that that trend is going to change. We're not seeing it in the burrs that are out there, and beyond that, the kids haven't been born, and I don't see any sign that COVID is helping us. So, it would be remiss as the superintendent to point out the obvious. In 2025, it would be possible to educate all of Monomoy Elementary students under one roof with class sizes at 18 or fewer. Again, this option would require a change to the regional agreement. Because I said money and all of this is tightly wound, there is the potential, if one did this, to have fiscal relief for both Harwich and Chatham. It does, in terms of that, it would save Harwich about $1.5 million per year and Chatham about $500,000 per year compared to operating both elementary schools under the current assessment approach. There are challenges, though, that if for whatever reason there is the baby boom of the 2020s, you have one building because you've let go of the other one. So there are challenges out there. Okay. So how do we remedy one school potentially being too small? To change any elementary configuration, it would require changing the regional agreement. Again, to amend the regional agreement, we have to work with the selectmen. We ultimately need to get approval of the voters in both at town meetings, at town meetings in both towns. The school committee has a 2021 goal to establish, organize, and lead a visioning session and or a community forum that includes representative stakeholders from Harwich and Chatham to discuss an elementary developmental program, sort of what makes the most sense in terms of learning for children at the elementary level. On to my recommendation. My recommendation is when you want to truly vision, I would always say that cost should not be the main focus of determining what's best. I do think that we need to go conduct another survey. I have one queued up following the same survey as before, thanks to Ms. Jordan's help. We have created a one-pager, but we have added a fourth/future option to that one-pager. The option is that I would envision the survey saying is no configuration, or no reconfiguration, redistricting, creating a new system with upper and lower elementary schools, and house all elementary schools, all elementary students under one roof in the FY25 or beyond. I think we have, at least our placeholder on the calendar is we would launch this survey mid-December. We will be launching a survey right after Thanksgiving for families to choose what learning option they want for the second half of the year. Do you want in-person or do you want remote? So we want to have time for the families to deal with that one before we send another big survey out to them. So we imagine that this would be going out around December 10th. We'll have it live for a week out there. We'll have data. I won't have data for you for your December school committee meeting, but I can provide you a report before we go away for the holidays, and I can publicly present the survey results at our first January school committee meeting. And now I've talked too much.
Thank you very much. Lots to take in. Questions? Jackie?
I had to finish writing my question before I forgot it. Just quick answers. Option 3, that would actually not have any cost savings by creating an upper and a lower?
It would not have cost savings. In fact, it potentially has cost. Okay. I would anticipate our transportation expenses are going to increase if we do an upper and lower. communities, and I don't want to burst bubbles. You know, I'm actually a fan of it. Communities that do it, I think, sometimes struggle with busing and school start times. You know, so as it is, we have a two-tier busing system. We start schools at 7:45 and 8:45, and you could imagine that it would likely require us to have an extra tier in there, which, you know, so our transportations go up because we're having to get kids, you know, all of the kids, in, you know, we're having to have buses do 3 runs, and then where's that third tier? And it's a little bit nightmarish for families if, like, the younger kids are starting at 9:45. It's, you know, so there's some challenges. Alternatively, you just get more buses, and then there's potentially longer ridership times. There's some transportation logistics that have a dollar sign attached to them with that.
Great. And my second question was, for option 4, and I was trying to look back because I feel like we talked about it, but the financial, like, positive impact for Harwich if we were to be under one elementary school roof.
So if we look at the way we currently assess, Harwich would save 1.5 million.
We would say 500.
Chatham would save 500,000. But
Okay.
I want to point out one thing. The superintendent's recommendation is that Chatham pay more to run an elementary school. And I would argue that ideally, in the ideal world, is happening sometime before now in FY25. So that figure is in the $300,000 range. So technically, if you think of it, Chatham would be saving it's in the $600,000 range. Chatham would save that $600,000 and the $500,000. So it's over $1 million swing if you look at it from what my recommendation was on the first half of the presentation.
I knew it was in there somewhere. Okay. Thank you.
All right, good. Anybody else? Meredith?
Just your thoughts of the towns taking care of their elementary schools. That would be considering no reconfiguration at all. It would just be each town taking responsibility.
Yeah, and it's one of these. It's really easy to go and say it and put it on paper. It's maybe a little more challenging when you work out some of the logistics, like how do you handle school choice? Like the kids from Brewster and Yarmouth that Robin mentioned that are at kindergarten at Chatham Elementary. So do we have the school choice money flow in and offset that budget? You know, and it's working out those logistics.
Yeah.
You know, and wanting to make sure that we iron it out so that we're doing the same thing each year and doing right by both towns. But it's conceptually the easiest one to wrap your mind around.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Good question, Meredith. That was on my list of questions. Anybody, Sharon, I think you had your hand up, and then Joe, and, oh, you did not? No. Okay, good. Joe?
Thank you for the detailed and very thorough presentation that will probably be given more than once. I have a question regarding the misconception section, if we can call it that. If a students who transfer out of district in the school choice program, if a student leaves Harwich Elementary and goes to an adjacent town that accepts school choice, the student leaving Harwich takes with him or her a certain amount of money to be brought to the receiving district. Isn't that true?
That is, yes.
Isn't it true, or is it not true, that a student leaving Harwich to come to Chatham that kind of choice, doesn't that carry some money from Harwich to Chatham or not?
So prior to regionalization, the child coming from Harwich to Chatham brought with them school choice money to Chatham because Chatham was paying the bill. At the moment, the way we are organized as Monomoy, intra-district, if the 10 children that are attending Chatham Elementary aren't sending money to Chatham Elementary because the money would be coming from Monomoy to Monomoy. So Monomoy acts as its own district. So the money's it's just happening within our fiscal umbrella. But if we have a child who chooses to go to Miss Henderson's school in Dennis, they would be taking with them from Monomoy $5,000 at least through school choice to support Dennis Yarmouth. But it actually wouldn't go specifically to her school's budget line. It would go to the district's budget line. But the district would be capable of sorting out those costs. I would just task Mr. McMillan to do that bean counting.
All right, thank you. Joe, anything else? All right. Jackie, I think you had your hand up again, and then Nancy.
I answered my own question in my head.
Okay, good. Nancy?
So I agree with Joe. Thank you for the detail to all of this, because it was a touchy subject 3 years ago, and it's still going to be a touchy subject. I have to say that seeing the population of Chatham Elementary, I mean, we know it's smaller. We hear about it. It only has one classroom in kindergarten. But to see that enrollment of 170 students, and then projecting out to saying that there potentially could be 120 students, that's one classroom per grade, K through 4. So that's just, seeing the numbers is just shocking to me. I think it would be interesting to see, I know that there's fixed costs to run a building. We've been doing this long enough to understand where costs are and how they happen. And I think one of the potential questions I could see somebody bringing up is where could we share some of those fixed costs? So, Chatham family saying they want to keep Chatham Elementary open regardless of how small. How can we reduce some of those fixed costs? So I think that it might be a fun exercise for you. Maybe not fun, but I think that also, what was else I going to say? I think there's great value in teachers having their own to be able to talk with. You say, well, why can't a first grade teacher talk to a second grade teacher? And they can, but it's just a totally different environment. They really need to be able to talk to their own grade level. And then I think that putting the survey out, we're going to find who our people are going to be, who we want to have in a group to have these conversations. So I think it'll be very interesting to see what comes out of this conversation, and we can start writing those names down. And then once the survey goes out, I think it will be pretty evident as to who we want to see, or when we want to see. I would picture that we want to see the more the merrier in a visioning session for the futures of the elementary schools. And I think that those people are going to kind of notice the survey, and people who wouldn't necessarily pay attention to an email that go out or something like that, but the survey will kind of draw quick attention to them. So I think that was it for now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Terry, and then Jackie.
I echo what Joe said, and Nance. We've been kind of push-pulling this issue for at least 3 years, mostly verbally, and I commend Michael and Scott to bringing a great deal of clarity, and the concising 23 pages in a, how would I put it, not in lowering a cudgel, but in presenting it in a way that you can say, here are the two problems, and there are one or two or three or four options or none, but at least as a beginning step to move knowledge level for all of us up, including the future parent meetings and the groups, so that at one point in the next few months, several people might say that they may not agree with these options, but I understand what's happening. So that's a good thing. A couple of other thoughts. I think how you look at it, somehow the regional agreement in the next year or two needs to be amended, period. Number two, I said this 3 years ago, and it's true, in a region that's only a little less than 2,000 kids, you can't run a school system with one key element of volunteerism being an element of change. You just can't do it. You might do it in one school building where you say, I need some volunteers to do this or that. But to rely on kid classroom balance, you can't trust year to year that you're going to come up with 5 cooperative moms and dads and 6 kids, and a couple of from Yarmouth or Dennis, year after year, to fill a gap, to make certain that gap between the elementary school and Town A is 1 or 2 kids equal or short of the other town, which for the last 3 years we've been fortunate, and that's why letting it go and leaving it alone, because most of the elements hadn't crystallized yet as to what do we do about this. Looking this over and thinking the last week, 3 years ago I saw it as a staff and a kid problem with the Chatham elementary teachers, if it continued, and you project cohort maybe 3 or 4 years, that the numbers might get down to 12 or 11 per class. And if that happened and you looked over to Howard and their classes were 16, 17, or 18, that could not continue. Just on that element, forgetting, and maybe it was just myself, I didn't take the next step and say, let me do some 8th grade mathematics, which, thank you, Scott, and it's really more than 8th grade because it's a little complicated, that fiscal side of the coin is the second dilemma. That if you continued it, Howard has been facing a structural deficit. As Chatham was slowly shrinking, and Howard was staying about the same in the elementary level, maybe adding a few kids, the gap between costing for a child in Chatham began to widen to a point where it can't really now be ignored. You can't just say, for example, 12 years ago, or 9, $1,000 one way or the other, whatever. 4 or 5 or 7 or 10,000 cries out for a solution. A challenge, but yes, and you just can't say, let's work this out for another 3 years and see where we find ourselves. There's enough info to realize that fiscal balance needs to be addressed in some way. So I, again, close with my initial comment that I thought this is a good start. This package here works folks through, even if it takes 2 or 3 times to review it, to say, I get the point. I now see it. Now, how do we, 3 years ago, I'd say, oh, gee, move East Howard's 3 or 4 streets. The mere fact I realized then, too, that we didn't have the authority to do that. Larger towns, specifically Barnstable, being not a region, was able to resolve that every year with their principals to make certain elementary was 17 kids per, whether it was West Barnstable BWB Elementary or whether it was Hyannis East. The numbers. If there was a mapping going on and youngsters in one school were struggling, any excess resources would be targeted by the superintendent and the principals to say, that's why you have 2 Title I's, or Title I math, or whatever it would be. We're in a unique situation that 12 years ago, somehow or other, it didn't dawn on the planning committee to say, there seems to be no flexibility to make certain what might happen with more kids or less. So I think this is a solid, good starter on a very real problem that I think it's worthy to be calmly addressed and see what we best can come up with.
Thank you, Terry. Thank you. Jackie?
Quick question. I just wanted to know how many students Harwich Elementary can hold and how many students Chatham Elementary can hold?
So, put on my glasses here.
And if you don't have that answer right now, it's completely fine, and I can get back to you
So
at a later
on
date, Dr. Carpenter.
If you go back to page 10 of your, the document, not the slideshow, so this is Appendix 1.
Oh, I'll put it over here.
So, over the last decade, Harwich Elementary has had up to 600 children in the building. And Chatham Elementary has had up to 277 children in the building. And I would argue that, that those are probably what we'd be looking at as maxima. But again, when I talk about the future projection, and if we look out at who's in kindergarten right now in both communities, and accelerate them up over the years to 4th grade, we're looking at 100 kids at Chatham Elementary School, just over 60 of them actually being Chatham students, and 470 students at Harwich Elementary School, with the vast majority of them being Harwich. So we're talking,
Well, I did
we're talking 570 kids out there 4 years from
2021,
now.
I think I came
district-wide.
up with 680, 682, something like that for 2021. So projecting that number is gonna continue to go down, I guess my thought process is going, does Chatham Elementary School have the potential to hold all the elementary students? Or does it have to be Harwich Elementary School that holds all the students?
Yeah,
what I was looking to see, the capacity.
Chatham Elementary School couldn't fit all of the kids.
600 kids.
Yeah, it can fit, it would be able to fit 2 cohorts of children if we were to do an upper and a lower, and still have space, and Harwich Elementary could fit 3 cohorts of children and still have space, if you went an upper and a lower.
Okay.
Anything else, Jackie?
No.
Sharon, did you have your hand up? No? Okay, Terry?
The thought strikes me that I want to share also. For the past several years, when it comes budget time for ourselves, as we conclude, there's always been an exercise in its futility that we've noticed, the collective group of us, starting with the Finance Subcommittee. Without even the knowledge that we now share here, the Harwich Town Management would say, wow, this figure of assessment, how is that growing like this? We would reconvene and say, despite poor Steve, what does our E&D look like? And each year we would take 100, we'd take 200,000 from this excess and deficiency fund to try to take the curse off of what apparently was a tough message for the Harwich side. Without this information even being known 3 or 4 or 5 years later, now we know what's been happening, one element of it. And so, by doing nothing, that next year's assessment in the year after that will be Harwich X plus, X plus, X plus. And I wouldn't think that the Chatham side would say, hey, wait just 1 minute, because each year just evolves into that, because there's a few less kids in one town, which favors that town financially, if you look favoring less, and the other town absorbs that, and ironically, absorbs it to the other township's village school. So those facts, kind of simple now, but a little complicated, how this all develops. The option may very well be to step aside for a couple of months and look at another way to do the assessment rather than a 3-year rolling average, because that's where the dilemma has exacerbated itself each year.
Thank you, Terry. I wanted to ask a question, just so I can understand, and this is why I think I asked Nancy to clarify the timeline. So are we looking, if a change is made, if a change is made to the regional agreement, is this for FY22 or FY23?
So, I have reached out to, in just knowing that I was going to take conversations we have had in sort of working groups with, last year with select boards or people on the select boards to being very publicly saying, I'm the superintendent and here is my recommendation. And I have a very clear recommendation. And I would say it's very clear looking at the budget season this year, is that I would strongly recommend, in fairness to what's going on, to have Harwich pay for its elementary school, Chatham pay for its. So I reached out to both town managers, explained that I was having this conversation, have told them that I will give them this presentation. They'll have it tomorrow to share with their boards, and just let Chatham know that there's a budget impact. This is what I anticipate it is. And again, I think last year when we let's say started having a hard conversation, in a working session, I think there were some challenges that that it was after budgets had started to solidify. Budgets haven't started to solidify, and I think it's, at some point you have to just say, hey, we have a dilemma that needs to get addressed. Let's go roll up our sleeves. So I would strongly push to have us work with the select boards to address at least the fiscal piece of this in FY22. Okay. I think the educational piece might take more time. I think that's on many levels the harder conversation. I actually think the fiscal piece, and this is just me, I think the fiscal piece is pretty straightforward. I think, and I said it's pretty straightforward, and it involves getting people to support it. I would argue that Chatham already has an agreement that they don't have to pay more. You have the crazy Monomoy superintendent that's saying, hey, I really think one town should pay more and one town should pay less. Well, there's a regional agreement that says what the funding should be. And, and I know that next door, our neighboring school district amended their regional agreement this past year. I suspect that there's not dissimilar things happening there fiscally, and there was not a concession to this magnitude that happened there. And again, I think it's, you have a regional agreement, and yeah, it's like, how do you convince somebody? It's like, oh, hey, sure, I'll pay another $600,000, and it's easy to convince one town to go and pay $600,000 less.
Right, exactly. Well, and the reason I asked that question is I just wanted to, our school committee goals, if I'm understanding this process correctly, so we have agreed on our goals to submit our red line version of the agreement to Chatham and Harwich to the town clerks by January 20th. If I'm understanding this process, and if anything has to be changed based on what you're saying, we only have, if we're sending the survey out mid-December, we have a December 10th meeting and a January 14th meeting, and that's it, if we're to meet this January 20th deadline. I guess I'm just trying to understand the timeline to make sure we do what we have agreed to do.
Yeah, so I actually think that there are mechanisms to have a budget, sort of what happens on the school budget side happen even without the regional agreement
Okay.
necessarily change, so towns can vote a budget, and do understand the cautionary warning the superintendent also has, and this is one that I thought and worry about. The superintendent has come out and said, or I have come out and said that that here's a recommendation. There's half of our constituency in Harwich have heard this recommendation, and they vote a budget at town meeting, and so we can't assume that a budget's going to pass in one town, if we're not, if that constituency isn't feeling like they're being heard on this side of the conversation too. It's a dicey thing.
Yeah.
And it's a challenging, it's trying to help people understand how an inequity's grown, what doesn't make sense, and appeal to one town to help correct it. And I do, I'm we'll say cautiously optimistic that rational minds will prevail at the end of the day on both sides.
Okay, thank you. Terry?
On that note that Scott alludes to rational minds, and I commend you on the clarity of this. I was impressed just earlier when I glanced on page 4. These aren't numbered, but I do, because with the 3 graphs, in fiscal 21, we're living that now, per pupil budget, which is fairly straightforward, for Chatham Elementary, works out to be $16,879 per child. Howard Elementary, with 512 youngsters, works out to be $11,885. That almost $5,000 difference per child multiplied times, that's a big number. That to any reasonable citizen looking at that saying, oops, I understand. 1,200, 13, 870, I understand we're in the weeds now, maybe. But that number jumps out with only the possibility of doing nothing, progressing to a ridiculous number. So at $5,000 per child, I think that is the strongest fiscal side of the issue, forgetting about the curriculum and moving kids, where someone from, let's just say, Chatham would say, let's look at that then and say, how can we make that a little bit more reasonable? And the 3-year count of youngsters isn't doing it. So let's look at, to me, that's I too realize it's not an easy task to convince, but if these numbers are accurate, that would begin a conversation and say, let's look at that and see what can be done.
I agree. Nancy?
To kind of go back to your timeline, I look at the regional agreement, that the date we had set was for no, major changes.
Right.
And so this conversation has come from a conversation that was had last spring, but that was not really meant to be kind of the regional agreement update. So I think that that's part of it. And then also, I look at, and I'm very glad that Scott kind of separated it out when we were doing our goals, to make sure that they are 2 very different conversations. There's the money conversation and the educational conversation. And, he said it towards the end, and I wholeheartedly agree. When visioning a future for Monomoy Elementary Schools, cost should not be the main factor in determining how best to educate our children. And I don't want to get lost in that. And yet I also 100% agree that we do need to do some sort of balancing the costs between the 2 elementary schools. So I think that we need to kind of focus the first step, and you mentioned the survey, and I mentioned the survey going out sooner than later as well, because that way it'll get the families aware of the situation. And I almost look at it as maybe that survey needs to take a step back so that we can start the financial conversation and get that before the budget season really gets well underway, so that we don't get caught up in the educational possibilities in the future.
All right, go ahead.
So, again, I have my recommendation, and I would argue that my recommendation in terms of modifying the document that we have in our hands, if we just go with the green and blues and yellows all drive me crazy, so I'm just going with the red line version. But section 9, there's it's method of assessing costs of the regional school district. A, operating costs, and there are 3 bullets there. I would argue after number 1, there's a new number 2 that says each member town will pay for its own elementary school, period. Number 2 becomes 3. Any excess costs will be assessed to the member towns based on the foundation enrollment. Because at the moment, you go to that, the excess costs are assessed to the towns based on foundation enrollment. That's what's happening. And Harwich ends up paying 75% of those excess costs at the moment, or 74.35%. But if you say, okay, here's how you go about it. You plug in towns pay for the own elementary school, and after that, the remainder of the costs get split out based on that rolling average. And so in the appendices in the 25-page document that you have, in each scenario, I've gone and done that. It's an assessment sheet that has what an assessment would look like, where it has minimum required contribution that the state has, and under minimum required contribution, it's cost of the elementary school for Harwich, cost of the elementary school for Chatham. Subtract those out, and what's left is your required contribution after those costs have been removed. And that's what's split on foundation enrollment.
Okay, thank you. So it sounds like, hypothetically, that we might be changing, perhaps, the agreement twice. Am I understanding this correctly? So if we're looking at, say, making some sort of, say, assessment decision for the FY22, it would require a change, as you described, under Section 9. So that's one change in one fiscal year. And then we continue the conversation with the community, and that might be another change for FY23. Is that what I'm understanding? I just want to make sure we're all on the same page.
I would say, yeah.
Okay, all right.
So we would be looking to have a vote at town meeting this spring in '21, hopefully spring, from each town to vote this as it currently is, with possibly an assessment change, and then a follow-up potentially if there is a configuration or elementary school educational change.
Okay, good. I just wanted to make sure we were all on the same page, because I think, yeah, okay, that makes sense to me then. Any other questions or comments? Nancy?
So, realistically, it's going to be December the next time we meet.
Exactly.
And budget season, we've already started meeting our finance subcommittee. Chatham had their budget summit 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, whatever that was. So budget season has started, and therefore, next time we turn around, it's going to be January, because December just always flies by. So I don't know if we want to wait until the next meeting to try to situate something, or you said you're going to give the presentation to the town manager, town administrator, so they'll have it. So presumably they'll have it for their Monday meetings next week. I'm assuming each selectman will meet next week. So that will kind of start them. So then maybe we reach out to them after because do we have 2 meetings in December, or just the one?
No, we just have one. We have a December 10th meeting, and then our next one is, I believe, January 14th. I was just looking at the calendar. So we only have one December meeting.
So-
I would recommend, our chair reach out. I mean, we had the workings of a group, and I think if I can disseminate the report, I've told both town managers that we're having this discussion tonight. I think we could request that we convene a working meeting in that first week of December, and I wouldn't want to wait until December 10th. And
Right, that's kind of where I was going.
Yeah, that was my concern. It just, I was just looking at the calendar and really concerned about all these different, the timeline of all of this. Yeah. So, to follow up on what Nancy's saying, I think we do need to, I guess, have some type of thought about where we're going with this. So, Terry?
To echo Scott's, with the timing in mind, and I think in this type of thing, there's no good time. It's always the end of one budget, oh, no, we haven't started yet, or pandemic. So putting that aside, I think within the next few days, we would authorize Scott to contact, and the chair, Joe Powers and Jill, and reform a smaller group until they can get that larger financial group that was on the phone back in June or July, to begin the process as quickly as in the next, say, 10 days or 2 weeks. And that would be step one is this evening with a public review of this. Step two would be to get enough yeses in an appropriate time in the next, say, 10 days for that small group to get together and walk everyone through this again with some added information that they could share with us.
Okay. Thank you. And I'm just, looking at our goals, because we had established a working group and hold a meeting early during the budget process to discuss regional assessment at the elementary level, and it would include MRSC members. So we can decide if it's just the chair or just a couple of us or whatever. We have to be mindful, I guess, of quorum, but so we already have that established as one of our goals, because I think we kind of maybe saw this, had the foresight. So, yeah, I think we need to take the step, because it is a goal, and we want to move in that direction. And I think early December, which is what you had said, which is a couple of weeks, 2 weeks. So yes, I think we need to take that step. Joe and Sharon, want to just make sure, anything you want to add to this?
For my part, thank you for the question. I've been trying to absorb all this, and I appreciate the comments that have been, and the thoughtful comments that have been made by my colleagues. There'll be more to say in the future.
All right, thank you. Sharon?
I would just say that I think the presentation was excellent. The discussion was excellent. I like where we're at right now, talking about moving the timeline up, because this, with COVID, this is not going to be, well, this is a year that we really have to look at finances, and so do the towns. So the sooner the better for everyone to kind of get their ducks in a row.
Okay, thank you. All right, so I think, we don't have any voting, but I think, if I'm hearing correctly, there's a consensus that we need to be moving ahead. So I would say that we definitely want to do the goal that we've set, which is to reach out. So 2 weeks, the chair would, and the superintendent, and it says MRSC members, so I don't think it just has to be me. Do we want to go ahead and establish who those members are, or do we just want to start with Scott and I getting the conversation moving? Start with that? Okay, there's nods. Okay, so that's a consensus, I think. All right, so that's what we'll do, Scott, I guess, is we will move ahead and try to form that working group as we've outlined it here, and then we'll just figure out if we need another school committee member or two to join that conversation. All right? Anything else? Okay, moving on to our next item, which is the Mask Annual Meeting Report. I put this on the agenda for two reasons. The first one is, I believe all of us, I think we were all at the morning session, and I just wanted to give everybody an opportunity, because that was another goal. You know, I'm kind of really trying to follow and stay on top of our goals this year. Joanne and I are really kind of monitoring to make sure we complete what we say that we agreed to. So one of our goals is understanding cultural diversity, and I'm just looking at our goals. So anyway, we all attended the annual meeting presentation. Does anybody want to comment? Any comments you want to make? Any insights you got from that presentation? Did it stir any questions that we might want to think about or explore? Sharon.
So I would just say that I thought the speaker was excellent. I understand it's the same speaker that the school had for the teachers and the assistants, but it was short, and so it only whet my appetite. She was very dynamic, but the big meat of it is further down the road.
Okay, thank you, Sharon. Anybody else want to make a comment about that presentation? Meredith.
I appreciated the presentation. I think that one of the takeaways, I wish I couldn't find my notebook tonight. I wrote notes, but one of the big takeaways was that she said that that you should be making it an ongoing conversation. And it's not just something that should be talked about now because of our current events, but it should be ongoing and part of the planning process within each district. So I appreciated that. And then the teacher and me appreciated all the books that she recommended at the end, because teachers need the tools to understand and help students understand, and then students need the tools to read and understand. So I appreciated that too.
Great, thank you. Joanne?
And to go along with what Meredith just got through saying, she also said you need to budget every single year. It's not, oh, went to that workshop, done with that. It's now, let's figure out, like Sharon said, there needs to be more meat. How do we put it into practice? She gave us a great outline, but now we need those hands-on tools.
Great, thank you. Anybody else? I loved her comment about really getting to know your kids for the first 2 weeks. And I think, you know, with all the pressures our teachers have to try to stay on top of, you know, the various requirements and the learning from the state, I just found that really refreshing, you know, because I think you get a lot out of learning about your kids in those first 2 weeks, and just having the focus be on getting to know your kids for the first 2 weeks. I really thought that was fabulous, and she made some good examples. Nancy?
That part struck me as well. The fact that it said, why are you doing lesson plans for the first 2 weeks of schools? You should be getting to know your kids, which reminded me of what I was looking, I had a sticky note that I stuck somewhere in my bag. Every child, every day. Yeah. And that really struck home with me, is that, you know, focus on something with every child every day, which I know is an impossible task for most days, because I've been there, I've done it. It's been a lot of years since I've done it, but it's still, I did it, and it's an impossible task for most days. But every child every day is what she said at one point, and that just really struck a chord with me.
Yeah, exactly. Anybody else? Are you oh, go ahead, Sharon.
Yes. So just because you brought that up, you might find it interesting that our 4 to 6 o'clock equity task force met, and one of the big suggestions was taking time at the very beginning, maybe the first week or two, to get to know the kids.
Great.
So it's permeating.
Yes. Well, thank you for sharing that. The other part of this report that I wanted to share with everybody, with the resolutions, there were 10 resolutions that were put in front of MASC, and all of them passed except Resolution 10, which was relative to the monitoring of attendance of students during the pandemic. Several school committee members across the state argued that we needed more information, and it eventually was a motion that it was tabled for more review. So that resolution did not pass on the for mask, but they're going to table it for review. The other interesting thing that I wanted to share, and I asked the superintendent to weigh in on this, Resolution 1, MCAS and high-stakes testing, which came in front of all of us, and we all agreed that that was a good one to support. And it did pass, but there were a lot of questions that were asked, and I didn't think about this, but I thought it was interesting. The John and Abigail Adams scholarships are based on MCAS testing. So I reached out, because I actually had 2 people reach out to me to ask me about that, that if MCAS, you know, the resolution was to, you know, to halt it for a bit of time, how would that affect the scholarships? So I reached out to the superintendent, and I just wanted to have you share what you told me, just for anybody listening in the public that has the same question.
Here comes the cynic in me. So I remember when the John and Abigail scholarships came out, and I think when I was much younger and far less gray and had younger kids, and I was like, oh, wow, this could be a great thing down the road. My kids could have free tuition if they did well. And it turns out the scholarship is not the biggest scholarship that it might have been billed as. It's more of about a $700-ish scholarship to maybe a little over $1,500 if your child's at UMass Amherst per year, which again, I don't want to say those aren't, that every dollar helps, but it's I think oftentimes we've been led to believe that this is like, if you do well in high school and you do well on your 10th grade MCAS, free ride at UMass Amherst, and when they came out, there was a little shifting that went on, and that tuition went down and fees went up, and so there was a little financial shell game on that end. But I think I responded to Sharon and Tina in an email and said, this is the state's money. The state can easily go and say, we're not going to have MCAS this year. We know how much scholarship money we want to give to deserving students, and just put a different thing. Is it going to be GPA? And if you have this GPA, X amount of scholarship dollars are available to you at any state college, because the John and Abigail Adams scholarship, you can use it at Cape Cod Community College. It's just a smaller amount at Cape Cod Community College, and if you're at UMass, it's a bigger amount, but it's far from a free ride. I think it's roughly about 10% of the tuition for that year, keeping in mind that they shifted money out of the tuition line so that you're paying more in fees. So it's 10% of a smaller amount of money.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? Because that didn't even occur to me until somebody from the virtual floor brought it up, and we had a discussion about it. So I found it very interesting. One other thing I also wanted to note under this particular report was there was a lot of debate around Resolution 4, which was lowering the voting age for municipal elections. Much to my surprise, there was a lot of pushback from other school committee members, and I noticed the divide was with towns versus cities, because those of us that are in towns saw the value of this, getting the kids involved in the town meetings, whereas the cities had a whole other thought about the kids not being mature enough to participate in local elections. So it was a really interesting debate. It ended up passing, but I found the debate very, very interesting, depending on where people lived in the Commonwealth and how they felt about this particular issue. And some people did go on the virtual floor as to make the statement that some of our young adults are a little wiser and more knowledgeable than some of the older folks might be voting right now. So I thought that was interesting. Yep. All right, so any questions about that? All right, moving on into subcommittee reports, we have the first reading, again, of the policy file, school attorney. So we have the policy meeting, and Sharon, you are the chair of that subcommittee, so I'm going to ask you to take the lead on this, please.
All right, you all have this in your packet, you've received it, and you can see that since this is the second first reading, that some of the plurals and adding designee were done for last time. And if you look at the last two paragraphs, you'll see the differences. We tried to take all the feedback into consideration, and our committee agreed unanimously that this was something that we were comfortable with, even with Ms. McGuire's astute background in the law. So if you have any feedback or questions, there it is.
All right, thank you,
But this
Sharon.
is where, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Thank you very much for reporting. All right, so is everybody clear on the changes that Sharon described? So we went back and everything in red was changed and noted. Any questions about this revision? Comments? Yes, Joe.
I think I'm unmuted, yes?
Yes, go ahead.
No, good, thank you. Changes make a good deal of sense to me, and I'm in favor of those. I think a problem we discussed last time is still not addressed, and I am not certain if that is because my colleagues on the committee do not see a problem where I do. And if no one else thinks it's a matter of any concern, then I'm willing to drop it.
So Joe, could you repeat what your concern is, if you don't mind saying that again?
Yeah, were you able to hear me properly?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, good. I'm just curious because it's been difficult to hear you folks with reverb and so on, and it's required a lot of concentration. So if you're hearing me well, all to the good. My issue is some just practical matters of when the superintendent has the permission from the committee to contact an attorney, and whether that same permission should be extended to the school committee chair. According to the draft we're looking at, on a routine matter, the school committee says the superintendent can seek legal assistance on a matter that's routine. You don't have to get permission from the school committee. Makes perfect sense to me. On something more significant, however, the school committee has to give permission to the superintendent and/or designee in order to seek advice from legal counsel, and it's that I don't know what to call it. It's that kind of roadblock, or it's that step which I think could serve us rather badly given the circumstances that we could potentially encounter. So the first thing is to recognize that this is what the document says, that in a situation, a legal situation that is not routine, the superintendent, before seeking advice of counsel, has to get authorization from school committee. So if a complaint, an open meeting law complaint, comes in to the superintendent's office on a Monday and says that the school committee conducted itself improperly at its workshop, and what's more, they were led into that improper discussion by the superintendent So everybody's now subject to this complaint or open meeting law. Let's say that comes in on a Monday. The superintendent might want to seek the advice of counsel. The school committee chair might want to seek advice of counsel on that day. But our policy here says, no, you must wait until the school committee gives you permission to seek that advice. So probably that would be Thursday. I mean, you could try to convene a special meeting prior to Thursday, but you still have to give notice of the agenda of the meeting. I think 48 hours notice, so you're not gaining much. So a complaint comes in on a Monday, let's say. You have the meeting on a Thursday. The school administrators are allowed to seek counsel, and they will do so on a Friday. Meantime, the clock has been ticking because you have a certain date in which you must respond to such complaints. So I think we're shackling ourselves unnecessarily and potentially to our detriment. I would like to see us simply say that the superintendent and the school committee chair can seek the advice of attorney promptly when a problem arises, and then at the next school committee meeting seek formal permission and keep the committee apprised. So we have to do two things. First, recognize what limitations this draft puts on the administrator, school committee chair, and we have to agree that that's actually a problem. And if no one else sees it, then I'll drop that point, but I think we may be doing some harm in being too restrictive to the superintendent and to the school committee chair, who I think deserve and need some more leeway in order to address potential problems that we have seen and have had to deal with, in order to address those problems effectively.
Okay, thank you. Any comment? Nancy and then Terry.
I agree with Joe's everything. And I wonder if it might be able to, in the 1, 2, 3, 4th paragraph, to say, however, when the superintendent, chair, or designee concludes that unusual types or amounts of professional legal service, go on from there.
Okay, so you're making the suggestion, we just basically add the word chair into that second sentence. Okay, Terry?
I echo Joe, as well as Nancy's suggestion. In past practice, one could argue that it gets so much in the weeds that, for example, I see an open meeting complaint to the superintendent's office, a parental complaint. Almost everything I can think of is routine to me for a superintendent to handle with the chair with a phone call. So to me, to all of a sudden separate it, I think the term, without getting into it, routine is something that covers a wide array of activities that the school superintendent responds immediately with the attorney.
Okay, thank you. Scott?
Yeah, I appreciate Joe's comment. I think that if you were to add potentially even just the words "or urgent" after routine, I think that first sentence gives the chair and superintendent leeway for things that are urgent or routine to seek legal counsel. But I do think it's a good suggestion, Joe, because I think routine sometimes I'm thankful that open meeting complaints aren't routine, but but I think in probably some school districts they may be routine here.
Okay, thank you. So Joe, I don't know how well you can hear, but what's been suggested in paragraph 4, we're adding like 3 words. So many instances of legal assistance of the district may be considered routine or urgent, comma, thus not necessary, whatever that word is, I can't say it. Thank you, Joanne. Specific school committee approval of prior notice. However, when the superintendent, comma, chair, or designee, ... So did you hear what I said, Joe? And and does that kind of, in this room, the superintendent and Nancy and Terry have all weighed in. Does that settle okay with you?
I've been listening carefully. I typed a sentence that I think would be more precise and clear in addressing the issue. I would add it as the next to last sentence in the 4th paragraph, and you have it in Zoom group chat.
Oh, I can't see the Zoom group chat.
If you can get to it. I don't know how to put that up, but I've sent it to everybody on the committee.
Okay.
And it would, as I said, it would go in the 4th paragraph next to last sentence, so that the next sentence read, the superintendent or designee will keep the committee and/or chair.
So we need it.
So it's this idea, because some things are just unfortunately, or fortunately, not routine. If we get a complaint from a citizen, that's not routine for us. You know,
Right.
I've only been on the committee about 3 years, but I've only dealt with one, or I'm only seeing one. That, by definition, can't be considered routine. But it's an urgent situation, and it's something that requires a prompt and effective response. I think this sentence gets to it. Just my suggestion.
Okay. Thank you, Joe. And Joe, thank you,
This
Joe.
I think either has to be read aloud or something so that it becomes available to the public.
That's what I needed.
Okay, so hold on one second. So Joanne, go ahead.
I was going to ask you to read it aloud because I cannot see it.
Right.
I know it's up there, though. I need about an 18, size 18, with
And
glasses.
so Joe, I'm just being, and Joe, just because we're talking about open meeting law, I will need you to read the statement rather than us read what you've written. So if you could read it as if you were sitting in this room and giving us your idea.
Okay, thank you. I wasn't clear what's visible to the public and what is not visible to the public. So the sentence that I would suggest be added is the following, quote, if a legal decision must be made in a timely manner, the school committee chairperson and/or superintendent may seek legal assistance prior to committee approval. And then the next sentence would be what is already written. It would say, the superintendent or designee will keep the committee and/or chair appraised of legal matters.
Okay, thank you. So, Nancy.
I appreciate the sentence, Joe, and I also think that keeping the wording that the policy subcommittee has agreed to and just adding in, I do appreciate Dr. Carpenter's or urgent sentence in there. I think just adding, I mean, I don't even think we need to have the word chair added in if we have the or urgent, because it doesn't specify, the first sentence, many instances of legal assistance of the district may be considered routine or urgent, thus not necessitating specific school committee approval of prior notice. Done.
Yes.
I think that covers, I don't even think we need the word chair in there.
Right, I agree. And Joe, I don't know, you may or may not have heard the superintendent recommended that the word or urgent at that 4th paragraph, and you may or may not have heard him say that, many instances of legal assistance of the district may be considered routine or urgent. So that's what we're kind of throwing in there. But I think with the word chair, though, however, when the superintendent, chair, I think we did want to keep that there, right? Okay.
It doesn't matter.
Okay.
I don't think it's necessary if the or urgent, because the or urgent doesn't specify whom.
Okay.
And I don't think it would be bad either. I don't.
Okay. Might just be safe. All right. So, any other comments or questions? Anything? Sharon, were you going to say something?
Well, I just wanted to make sure I had it, because if all we're doing is we're changing after routine or urgent, and we're putting in after superintendent designee or chair, then I think we can, if I have that correct, I'm not sure, you're in Zoom land.
Yes, I
But
think you,
if that's correct, I think that we can accept this as the first reading and come back with just that minor change.
yes, and I would agree
onto
with
the
that.
second reading.
And I'm getting nods. Jackie?
I was just gonna say, I thought I heard Nancy say that we don't need to put chair in there.
That's what she said.
Right.
That is what she said.
So all that we're adding is or urgent.
Right. That's what she said. I just didn't know with Joe's comments, I don't know if it helps. I don't think it hurts. So I can go one way or the other. I don't think it, yeah.
I like it in there. I think that was a good suggestion of Joe, so that it just clarifies it.
So is everybody okay if we just put chair, I don't think it hurts anything. So when the superintendent, comma, chair or designee, is that okay?
Sure.
All right, so I think those 3 words, or urgent, chair, and I think we can bring this back. Is everybody good with that? We're getting some nods, so we'll bring this back for a second read, Leah, on December 10th with these changes, and it sounds like Sharon got them, so everybody good?
Yep.
Perfect, all right. The next item, the District Wellness Committee report. So it's not really a report. I just wanted to say that this year, I'm the liaison to the Wellness Committee, and I understand, it was my first meeting, we met last night, and I understand from Melissa that she will do her own report for us, but I just put it on there just to let everybody know, because I think there was some confusion between whether Sharon was going to do it or I was going to do it. So I am the liaison, and I attended the meeting last night, and I thought it was fantastic. It was, for me, coming onto the committee for the first time, it was wonderful to hear Garth and our nurses and our principals, and Melissa had us go out and breakout groups on Google, which I thought was pretty cool, and we went and worked on some policy parts together. And I also know, and I don't know if this is new or not, but we also have 3 students on the district wellness committee, which I thought was wonderful. So I just wanted to make that report that I am the liaison this year, and we have 3 more meetings. And that's it. Any questions? All right, moving into the superintendent's report.
I'll be short about this. Let's see. So first, I think last time I was here, I shared with the school committee that I had signed the district up or submitted a little form to the state saying that I would be interested in having us participate in this BitNax Now antigen COVID testing, so that it could be a tool that we could use. I found out just earlier in the week that we have been accepted to be able to do this. There is still a whole pile of paperwork that I have to work through with the nurses, along with some pretty major logistics on how we go about this. But we had a great conversation with the nurses, myself, and our district physician, Dr. Corcoran, just to discuss when it would be appropriate, because there were some ridiculous examples that the Department of Ed used on how you might use this test. Like, child has sniffles, goes to the nurse's office, nurse swabs the kid's nose, puts 6 drops of the reagent on. 15 minutes later, the test is negative, and you send the child back to class. No, we have been sending children home because you don't know if that child is going to become symptomatic. And these tests, if you do the research on them, like I've done, they are extremely effective if the person is full-blown sick. You don't want somebody full-blown sick coming into your building to get tested. You want to create a situation where they may be driving up, you hand the kit to your staff member or to the parent, and the parent can swab the nose. It's a low-skill thing that's needed to be done. If it's a high school student, they can swab themselves. You put the drops on, and they're in their car, and you minimize the contact there. But the test is very accurate if they are full-blown sick, but you don't want them in your building. And you want to use it as a tool, in my opinion, and I think our nurses and district physician agree, to help us be in a position to quarantine and to prevent spread in our buildings. Because at the moment, and this is happening locally and nationwide, the time lag to get tested is you may have a day or two before you can get tested, and now the results may come in a week later. So you can imagine if you have a situation where a staff member or a student calls the school nurse and says, I'm home sick. The school nurse says, we think you should be tested. They go get tested, and you're having to wait a week to find out if they potentially could have exposed anyone before you're intervening and quarantining. That's not good. It doesn't help us protect everybody and to make sure that spread doesn't happen in our schools. So, so it becomes something that if someone's symptomatic, that we can use to help quarantine quicker. And that's, the tests are not good in the case of the last COVID positive. We've only had 3 so far this year where we've had somebody COVID positive in the building. And we've quarantined close contacts around them, none of which have turned positive, but we've quarantined those close contacts, and the ones that were nearest, we've encouraged them that they work with their primary care physician and get tested. But those individuals weren't symptomatic, and you would not, in that case, use this type of test. It's not going to pick up. It's not going to pick up accurately somebody who's not symptomatic. It works very effectively if somebody is symptomatic to say if it's COVID or if it's not, but again, you have to be strategic on when to use them. So we're going to be working through the logistics on that. And then just the last thing when it comes to COVID, and this is my soapbox commentary of the evening. I was listening to the radio, and I'm a little dismayed with New York City choosing to pull the plug on schools in New York City. And I understand why. So they had a threshold that if the positivity rate, which is the percentage of people that are getting tested, if 3% of the people that are getting tested in a period of time are positive on those tests, that's when they think there's too much COVID in the community. And I get that. But in the same news report this morning, the positivity rate in schools for for staff and students that have gone and got tested was 0.0 something. And it really is, it speaks to the fact that if you're in schools and you're wearing masks and you're maintaining social distancing, you can effectively keep the virus from spreading. And we're seeing it in schools here on the Cape, here in Monomoy, and even from the news report in New York City. It baffles me that the decision was to close schools and not the places in New York City where the spread is happening, like bars. So I hope that should we ever on the Cape start to hit 3%, or in the state of Massachusetts hit 3%, that we really look at where is spread happening, and let's close the hockey rinks. But that was for you, Jackie. But the schools, and knock on wood that that we are able to go and keep our school going, and other schools elsewhere. But I do worry that there are some decisions that are being made on what we're going to keep open, and we're closing things that are effectively keeping spread from not happening. And so I had a online Google Meet meeting with some of our teachers and MRA leadership earlier this week, and I was just sharing with them. I said everybody in this district, our staff, our administrators, our students, our parents deserve a pat on the back for what we're managing to do. And as long as we keep wearing the masks, maintaining the distancing, having the kids go and use the force of nature on their desks, having our custodians, deep clean each evening, we can stay open and we can keep spread from happening. And we'll just, hopefully be able to use these Big Necks now tests whenever we are able to get them as one more tool to go and keep spread from happening in the buildings. That's it from me.
Great, thank you. Comments, questions for the superintendent? All right, seeing none, we will move into our action items. The presentation of the warrants, they have been presented for signature. Declaration of surplus. Could I have a motion, please?
Madam Chair,
All right, Nancy?
I move to declare surplus materials as presented in our packet.
Wonderful. Second. And Jackie seconds. Any discussion, questions? We have Michael at the ready if anybody has any questions. All right, good. So we're going to take a roll call vote starting in the Zoom room. Joe, we'll start with you.
Joe Osceola, aye.
Thank you. Sharon?
Sharon Stout, aye.
Thank you. Jackie?
Jackie Long, aye.
Meredith?
Meredith Henderson, aye.
Thank you. Nancy?
Aye.
Thank you. Terry?
Terry Russell, aye.
Thank you. Joanne? All right, Tina Games, aye. So that's unanimous, Michael. Yay. All right, and next is adjournment. May I have a motion to adjourn, please?
So moved.
All right,
Second.
Terry has made the motion. All right, Terry made the motion, Joanne seconded. Now roll call vote. Joe, we start with you.
Joe Osceola, aye to adjourn.
Thank you.
Sharon Stout, aye.
Thank you. Jackie?
Jackie Long, aye.
Meredith?
Meredith Henderson, aye.
Thank you. Nancy?
Aye.
Terry?
Aye.
Joanne? Aye. And I'm an aye. So it's unanimous. We are adjourned at 8:48. Thank you,
I say
Leah.
good night.
All right, good night, everybody.